Tō katoa, good morning. Could I call on our Deputy Mayor to open with karakia? Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, o tira tēnā tātou I hui mai nei I tēnei wā. Ka huri au ki tōku iwi, tōku whānau tēnā no hoki koutou, nau mai, hara mai, whakatau mai. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Our Deputy Mayor. I'd now like to call for apologies. I do have apologies for Councillors Mickelard, Wood and Isabellan. Are there any others to note?
Mr Chair, depending on how long you chair this meeting for, I will be either an early departure, possibly, on council business.
Okay, we can include that. There being no others, I'll move those apologies and seconded by Councillor Naylor and invite a vote. That's passed, 12 votes for and none against. Before we continue, I just need to cover some health and safety. We have a lot in attendance today. Can I please explain that this meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Health and safety requirements for the Council chamber are actually displayed for the fire emergency and also for the meeting point, which is in Te Marae o Hine in the square under the clock tower. This is a non-smoking building. There's a defibrillator on the ground floor, and if you can report any incidents to our committee administrators, that would be appreciated. Online participants, if they could introduce themselves before they speak, and if you can keep your cameras turned on and microphones muted. Great. Item 3 on the order paper is notification of additional items, and we do have an additional item today which needs to be accepted, or moved to be accepted, which I'll move, which is the remittance to the Local Government New Zealand 2023 Annual General Meeting. Look for a seconder, Councillor Naylor. Any comments or questions regarding it? Mr Mayor.
We're just accepting, aren't we?
Yes, that's right.
We're going to
we'll debate it later.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yes, we can, and this will become item, which item will this become? Yeah, so this will be the last item before we go into the work schedule. I would now like to invite a vote. That's passed, 12 votes for and none against. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Are there any? There being none. Are there any public comment submitters wishing to speak? There's no public comment, which moves us on to item 6, which is the hearing of submissions for the proposal for reclassification of Opi Place for a recreation reserve to a local purposes for community reserve. Yes.
And just explain the 10 minutes.
Yes. Can I just outline for the submitters that there's 10 minutes speaking time, and that does include questions. And there's an green, amber and red traffic light, and the green will go for 7 minutes, the amber for a further 2, and the red will start shining for the last minute. We now need to thank you. Yeah, I need to take the recommendations before us before we head to presenters, and that the committee, excuse me one moment. You want us to move this, right?
No, that's all, we're just hearing submission.
We're just hearing submitters. Oh, fine, for the NB. Sorry, yeah. So the committee will hear submissions from presenters who indicated their wish to speak and be heard in support of these submissions, and that the council committee note the procedures of the hearing submissions as described in the procedure sheet. I'll move that recommendation. Councillor Johnson is seconding, and now I'd like to invite a vote. That's moved, unanimously supported. Yes. So we have a change to the order paper. There is now just one submitter wishing to be heard, which is submission 103, Liza Whaiapu, if you would like to be welcomed to the table. Floor is yours.
Kia ora tātou. Oh, this is a bit nerve-wracking, isn't it? Mua tarau kia tātou katoa, ka tika, ka mihi ki a koe e te koromatua, a Grant Smith, korua tahi ko Whai Deeps. Tō tātou koromatua tuarua, neira te mihi mana hau ki a korua I tēnei ata. Ki te tia mana o te hui nei e born, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
O tira ki ngā kai kaunihira, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Liza Whaiapu, and I just wanted to take a few minutes today to add further comments to my submission, which I take has been read, and to also provide a bit more context as to why I am in support of the reclassification of the Opi Reserve from a recreation reserve to a local purpose community reserve. I am the Kaiwhakahaere Centre Manager of Te Kohanga Reo o Ngāti Hinioti. While I hail from Te Tai Tokero in the King Country, I have lived here in Palmerston North all my life and was lucky enough to score me a handsome, intelligent and young local Māori boy from Rangitane. So my hono tū Rangitane is through my whakatipuranga, my husband, and of course our beautiful tamariki and mokopuna. I have been working within the Māori education sector in Palmerston North for 22 years, and what I do know is that transformation through education is key to reaching the goals and aspirations of our tupuna and our people. One of my passions is assisting in the movement of revitalisation efforts, especially te reo Māori, mātauranga Māori, and te tuakiritanga o te tangata cultural identity. While I work in a kohanga reo, I actually have a postgraduate diploma in teaching and learning in Māori medium kura kaupapa. But my love for our kohanga reo babies keeps me in the ECE sector. And after 8 years of managing Te Kohanga Reo o Ngāti Hinioti, it is still an honour to continue serving the local hapu, community and tamariki, but more so to continue one of the legacies left by my late mother-in-law, Lorraine Fitzgerald. I must also acknowledge the many whānau of Rangitane and Hinioti, please excuse my back, who support the reclassification so that they can fulfil their long-awaited aspiration to have their own and or another marae. I have been a part of this journey for 23 years now and have seen the good, the bad, the blood, the sweat, the commitment and the sacrifices many have had to endure to be where they are today. To the whānau, many of you who I have personally spoken with have been filled with mixed emotions. There's been tears of excitement. I've seen smiles radiate like I've never seen before. And I've seen shoulders rise again in the hope that this could be your chance. I also know that it has come with its challenges. However, you have had to let this process take its course. There have been personal attacks and fabricated accusations by a selected few who have opposed the reclassification. Yet, in this whole unfamiliar process, you've all remained humble and respectful, and it is a true testament to your character. So, to those who are here today in support of, to those who completed submissions in support of, and those absent who have sent their apologies and well wishes, e mihi aroha ana kia koutou. How amazing and rewarding would it be to watch our tamariki grow up right next to a marae? They would complement each other well. In Māori we have a saying, whatu ngaro ngaro te tangata, toi tū tonu te whenua. As man disappears, the land remains. As Māori, we identify ourselves by the relationships our tupuna formed with our land. These relationships shape us and connect us to place and time. Man and people come and go, but the land is constant. It will always remain. While we are the people of this land, tangata whenua, born of this land, mana whenua, we are merely stewards or kaitiaki of the land, and we have a duty to serve and protect it. Kaitiakitanga is a living practice for some of us, especially those of us that are at the forefront contributing, leading, and exempling within Te Ao Māori. Kaitiakitanga is a relationship which supersedes all arguments of ownership, a relationship which reinforces a sense of belonging, shared between those kua ngaro atu, who have passed on, e ora tonu ana, the living, me te apōpō, and those yet to be born. It's a sacred connection which has dual meanings for us. Whenua means to both nourish the people and to nurture the growing of new life. Summarising Sir Mason Jury's whare tapa whā model, while the four walls of the whare are the symbol of the four dimensions, it's the whenua that forms the connection and foundation for them to thrive. The whenua at Opia Reserve has not been looked after, and hasn't been for some 20 plus years now. Kei te noho moho ao te whenua rā. It sits isolated, and it's sad to see it sitting there not being used to its full potential. As has been said before, Opia Reserve isn't the most desirable piece of land in the city, but it can be, if it sits with the right people. We, as kaitiaki, can see the potential and opportunity to not only put some love and life back into the whenua, but for the whenua to also do the same for us. Through the lens of Māori, land is important to our well-being, and who better to look after that piece of whenua than those who are proposing to be the kaitiaki of it. It's also important to strike the balance in getting these land classifications right, so that we protect land with conservation and cultural value, and unlock land with neither, making it available for other purposes. Unlocking this potential with our proposal is a win-win for all, as the kohanga reo and marae will not only serve the iwi and hapu, but also the community, manuhiri from outside Arohe, and even those from overseas. Now, I know time is ticking, so I'll get my kia tere on and wrap up my kōrero. And I'll finish with these last comments. How would the proposal affect the use of the reserve if it was to be reclassified? Well, it would become a new community asset, supporting children's learning and well-being for whānau, hapu and iwi. Access would be from a newly formed entrance off Wilson Crest. There would be nil effect for people still being able to move through the space, as there is an existing footpath that would remain and a coach track along the top of the Te Kāwau stop bank that everyone uses. The landscape would be an integrated design to allow for the community to be able to interact with, and in my opinion, would do nothing but enhance and uplift what is currently an eyesore. It will also expedite the Kāinga Ora Housing Improvement Program, which I can confirm as these conversations have already started. Having a physical presence will also provide greater benefit to enhance Te Manawa Te Wai. It would also improve our access to greater natural resources. For example, a tuna platform on the stream would be awesome. For our kohanga reo tamariki, of course, not hākari time at the marae near whānau. Last but not least, the final reason to reclassify the reserve would be because of the overwhelming positive responses from the submissions in support of. It's clear and it's evident that our proposal is supported, wanted, and needed. My final words are to our whānau. Don't give up. Whether this goes through or not, we will keep fighting and we will keep going until our last breaths. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ngā mihi, there may be some questions from members. Councillor Hancock, followed by Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Kia ora whaia, and thank you. I just really have just one question. There was some comment made in one of the submissions just around the previous use of St Michael's and the fact that that's no longer available. Can you just comment on that in terms of whether or not that was a suitable venue previously and looking forward, how that might be?
St Michael's Marae is a church before it is a marae. Our kōhanga reo has been open for 8 years, and when we have taken our tamariki over, but the doors are always locked and closed. I'd like to imagine that if we do open up this marae, the doors and gates would always be open for our tamariki mokopuna to utilise. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. That's a
Kia ora.
clarification.
Councillor Johnson.
Tēnā kōrua. Liza, can you just tell us about some of the constraints that the Kohanga Reo is facing in its current location?
Yes, absolutely, and that's a good question. As we know, we are in the hub of Highbury. It's a very colourful area. On the daily, we have people walking past our kōhanga reo who are having domestics. We have a bottle store, which is one door down from us. There is a lot of gang action within our area. Most recently, the shooting, which was actually during operating hours. And myself, Chris, and one other were sitting in the office at that time when that did happen. And it was scary, very scary. One of the impacts of that was that we had to close our kōhanga reo down for the next following 2 days for the safety of our tamariki mokopuna. Yeah, that's pretty much the guts of it. The reality of it, whānau, was that we are in the hub of Highbury. The parking, it's unsafe for our tamariki. My mother-in-law did say that it was only to be temporary, that we stay where we are until we find our ground and find something else for our tamariki mokopuna, and we believe that we have found somewhere else. We don't want to move from Highbury. We serve a good purpose in that community, and if we can stay within the vicinity of where we are, and Opie Place is close by, then we would be grateful.
I just have a second question, if that's right, Mr Chair. So you mentioned in your submission that the Kohanga Reo is very open to enrolments from people with overseas backgrounds or heritage or whatever. And I noted that some of the submissions that were opposing were talking about feeling that this would be a development for only one community. So would you like to expand on that comment that you made in your submission about the openness and welcome that people who are not Māori might get from the Kohanga or the Marae?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not too sure where that comment has come from. I am aware of the comment that was made, and yeah, it's very incorrect. Outdoors, we have an open door policy. We invite anybody and everybody of all walks of life with different backgrounds. We are not exclusive at all. Sorry, it's a bit nerve-wracking sitting up here. It really is. Yeah.
Well, you're doing great. Don't be nervous.
I really don't understand where that statement has come from, to be honest, because never ever have we ever closed our doors to anybody. We are open to, while we are Ngāti Hine o Te Kohanga Reo, we are not just for Ngāti Hine o Te whānau. We have whānau that travel to us from Kelvin Grove. as well. So, that just goes to show that we're open. We only have 7 kohanga reo here in Palmerston North. So quite often they get full. They get full fast. So sometimes it means that we are open to accepting tamariki from outside of Highbury. However, our Hinio Te Whānau and our Highbury whānau do get first priority, but that never does close the doors to anybody else. I am also aware of the statement that was made in regards to the amount of Hinio Te Tamariki that come through our kohanga reo. Now, it does concern me, that comment, as the person that did make it is an employee of MOE. That is sensitive information, and I'm not too sure how that person, knows that type of information, but it is incorrect. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Mr Chair.
One final member wanting to ask a question, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Kia ora kōrua, Liza and Chris, and thank you for speaking to your submission, Liza. My question builds a little bit on where Councillor Johnson was. Your response to her was quite focused on the kohanga reo and kind of educational component. I just wanted to know, kind of from your hapu vision point of view, when you've put to us in writing in your submission about the marae being a gathering place for all, what kind of vision does that include?
Yeah, marae are for everybody. I guess it's kind of, at least they should be. And we know that the drive behind this particular proposal, the drive is that we want this to be open to the community. So it starts off by our exampling and leadership. I'm just a bit,
That's great. Thank you. Mr Chair.
Thank you, Liza, and thank you, Chris, to tautoko and speak to your submission today. This will be forwarded on to the next, as part of the next report that's going to be considered, and then the deliberations will follow through after the reclassification decisions have been made.
ka pai, thank you.
And kia ora for the support in the gallery for this item. Thank you.
Ka pai. Te waiata?
Ai. Kia ora koutou. I'd now like to welcome Kathy Diva-Todd, our Group Manager for Parks and Logistics, for item 7, which is the Opi Reserve Reclassification Summary of Submissions, page 11.
Thank you, councillors. The report in front of you summarises the submissions. This will, with other information that's been heard today, go through to the next stage, which will be a report back for a decision. I'm just here to answer any questions on what's in front of you today. Thank you.
Thank you. I open it up for members. Are there any questions? There's no further questions. Straightforward report. Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it. I'd like to move the recommendations before us, which is to receive the summary of submissions on Orpi Place, proposal to reclassification of Orpi Place Reserve for recreation, from recreation to local purpose community, presented to the Strategy and Finance Committee 10th of May, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comment or debate. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to make comment on the decision to reclassify or not reclassify, because I think that will be premature. But I just want to comment on the, I guess, consultation process thus far. And I also was at the hui at Orpi Place, the community hui, and I thought it was a very I think it was described as lively in the report. It was a lively hui, but I felt that there was good opportunity for everybody to speak, that everybody who was there who had something to say had an opportunity to speak, and I thought it was a very, although there wasn't necessarily, only one view expressed, it was a very positive hui, I felt. It was good, and I want to congratulate the council staff who enabled it, but also the people, some of whom are here, who spoke at that hui, because I think it's a very important means of people engaging with which I think Eliza touched on, a process that is, quite strange, really. And so, I'm grateful for those who then subsequently took the time to put in a submission. And it's very helpful to council because we have to follow a particular legislated route about how we go about these things, strange as sometimes these routes are. And I do really just want to express my appreciation for those who engaged, both on the day at the community hui and also who took time to put a submission. It's very helpful, so thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. I'm completely in favour of everything that Councillor Johnson had said. I think it's really important when we have the submissions, that entire process is significant. And neira taku mihi ki a koe wha, Liza. It is quite daunting, but you did a really great job in terms of articulating the aspirations and the desire. For me as a councillor and a Māori, I can relate to the whenua. I think all of us around here can. And so you highlighted some really significant points. And as an educationalist too, I see the huge benefit of kaitiakitanga for everyone within Highbury. It has concerned me for some time, the location of the Kohanga Reo, given its restriction and location very close to a bottle store and so forth. And ka tautoko au, I support this, and I'm grateful to all those who've made submissions, because I think it's important that we hear those quite clearly. It's with the percentage of those who submitted in support of the proposal to reclassify the land, that's assuring. Nō reira, tēnā koe, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora. Mr. Mayor.
Kia ora, thanks, Mr. Chair. I may stray a little bit into predetermination, but as my colleagues know, I'm not a great policy person, but just want to acknowledge you, Liza, for coming up. It is a bit daunting coming up here, but actually I'm wondering who's making the greatest statement here. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. Look, and to my colleagues, who would make the better guardians of this space? Us or Hiniate? I think you know what the answer is anyway. And yeah, you've got my support, definitely, and just want to acknowledge your late mother who came and saw me, and one of her last wishes was for this place to be returned. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to comment briefly on the report itself, which is a useful summary of submissions. But in 4.3, there's a statement that says submissions mixed up their positions on support or opposition to the reclassification with the types of activities. And I would put it to my colleagues that the questions that were asked included both of those questions. And so I don't think it's quite fair to submitters to characterize it as the submitters mixing things up. The fact is, we went out and asked questions about both reclassification and potential use, and I'd hope that we're not going to put any less weight on submissions based on this comment, because I do not support the view that anything's been mixed up here. I think we asked a range of questions and got answers to those. So just wanted to highlight that within the report. But overall, good to see a very clear indication from the community through a number of submissions, including what we've heard today, which is greatly appreciated. Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora whanau, excuse my back. Eliza, just well done on your presentation. I will stray like the Mayor did. I know Opie Place well, and the reserve and what it's used for currently favours it going forward with what we want to do with it. Well, I think we all want to do with it. And I'd just like to make a special comment to another couple in the audience, Bryce and Marty Fitzgerald. Takes me back a few years, 8 years of age. I met those gentlemen when I first started boxing. And we were taught by their father. I just want to acknowledge these two gentlemen. Thank you. And so I will be fully supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. There's no further members wishing to speak. I'll now invite a vote. That's passed unanimously, 12 votes for and none against. That now moves us on to item 8, which is the minutes of the 22 March meeting. I'm happy to move them. Seconded, Councillor Naylor. Is there any matters arising from those minutes? No? No, there's not. Just invite a vote, and then we might just pause. There's no wishing to speak. We're going to put the recommendation. That's passed 11 votes for with 1 abstention. Kia ora whanau. We might just pause if there's no further business relating to this topic. So feel free to stay, absolutely. There's some very riveting topics for us to consider, but absolutely feel free to depart if that is your wish. Kia ora. Thank you, members, for that space during our meeting for an appropriate farewell for those there that have attended. I'd now like to move us to item 9. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Item 9 is the quarterly performance and financial report for the period ending 31st of March. Now I'd like to invite Scott Manser, our Finance Manager, Sue Kelly, Manager for Project Management Office, and Andrew Boyle, Head of Community Planning, to the table to present this report.
Good morning, elected members. I'm going to take this report largely as read, but I do have a couple of mentions covering some of the details. The change from the December second quarter report for the end of December to the third quarter report end of March is the surplus is growing, but to note that as a result of timing of planned expenditure on 2 key programs, the ERP replacement program and the digital transformation. As you can imagine, software projects and getting that timing identically right in the budget is really, really hard. There are a couple of recommendations in the covering paper about a couple of overspends on some operating activity budgets, Manawatu River and active and public transport. It's intended that these will be offset within the infrastructure unit managing out to the end of June. And overall, there is a slight overspend expected at year end of 0.3 million. That's made up of the electricity and insurance overspends of 0.8, offset by the intended underspend on the ERP program of 0.5. That's largely all around the operating finances. I'll pass over to Sue to talk about capital delivery.
Good morning. Through the Chair. So in terms of capital delivery, the momentum has continued to build, and in fact the April spend was just over 11 million. The infrastructure team is working together at the moment to make sure that we've forecasted at project level the end of year position for each of those. And as part of that, we're looking at obviously the process of savings and carry forwards and looking at rolling renewals. And the analysis of that, the detailed analysis of that will be coming to you as part of the deliberations information for the meeting on the 31st of May. We are aware that any changes to carry forwards where we've got contracts underway and there's been changes as they're progressing will need to be offset against the overall quantum of next year's programme. So we're looking at putting that information in the paper. Along with all of that, we are working really hard around the procurement of contractors for next year's programme of work so that we can actually hopefully get going at the beginning of the financial year with much more speed than we have previously. You know, we're looking at what past performance has been and how we're going to mitigate that because there has been a slow start. One of the things obviously was weather related this year, but having all those contractors in place ready to press go at the beginning of the financial year is our intention at the moment. That's it for me.
Good. Andrew, nothing from you. There's some questions coming through. Councillor Hancock, followed by Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the report. I've got a number of questions, Chair, if that's okay. The first one just relates to pages 4143, programs 115 and 2119, and that's pavement renewals, etc. There's commentary in there around Fulton Hogan. Can you perhaps just elaborate on that in terms of risk for council, please?
We'll just pass that question over to Hamish, our Manager of Transport Services.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the delays with Fulton Hogan has generally been in the programming space. So every time they have a bit of bad weather, which we have had throughout the year, it's pushed everything backwards. So a little bit of that's been out of their control. We're working pretty closely to try and rein that back in towards the end of the year.
Great. Thanks, Hamish. And just going to page 47, and that talks about the second round of Better Off funding, which is not proceeding. So in terms of our planning, can you give us any understanding of how that might impact our planning going forward?
Yes, absolutely. So the first round of funding, which we've secured 8.16 million, is still going ahead. That's all we have planned at this stage. There are a couple of projects that were intended to make use of the second tranche of funding, and I understand we have the option to transfer those projects if we need to, and I believe the infrastructure team are having a look at that right now, ready for that paper and the deliberations paper at the end of May for council.
Yes, so what were those projects and what was the value of the work, please?
Don't have that off the top of my head, but maybe our Chief Financial Officer can answer that one.
Yeah, look, through you, Mr. Chair. If I recall, we had a couple of programs in that would feed into tranche 2. In particular, we were doing a investigation and design from memory for a multicultural hub, which we I think it's $500,000 we allocated to that. So you still have options there, councillors. You can still proceed with those and then choose to fund it through the long-term plan as opposed to tranche 2, or what we are getting advice from DIA at the moment is that for those programs that feed into tranche 2, we have the option to potentially reallocate. So the other one, of course, was construction of housing at Summerhays Street. So we've got 4.16 million, I think, from memory, that's going to construction there in tranche 1. But it was signalled that we would be utilising tranche 2 to finish the full amount of construction at that site, because it would be more than 4.16 million. So that was those two programs were going to feed into tranche 2 as well.
So in a ballpark figure, how much of intended tranche 2 had we kind of figured that we were actually going to use for some of these projects going forward?
We hadn't actually allocated amount out of tranche 2 for those yet. We hadn't until we've gone through the design and that piece of work. It would be too difficult to actually say how much more would be required that would have come out of tranche 2 for those.
Okay, and can you just remind us what was the figure that was potentially coming to the council for tranche 2?
I believe it was 24 million.
Thank you. Just going to page 73. I'll just go to my notes. And under water activity there, we've got compliance with Part 4 bacteria compliance criteria, and that relates to our bores. What work have we actually got ongoing presently with that? And do we have some issues in terms of budget around that, please?
Is that working? Yep. Mike Monaghan, Group Manager for Three Waters. Yeah, thanks for the question. The councillors will be aware that in November 2022, Taumata Arawai, the national regulator, introduced the drinking water quality assurance rules. I guess one of the challenges that councils up and down the country are facing is the chlorination question. Even though we chlorinate our bores for bacterial compliance, we don't have a contact time reservoir, which is part of the new rules. So in the next LTP, there's allowances made to start looking at how we might overcome that. Contact tanks would need to be designed and built. Yeah, so it's around about contact time with the chlorine rather than not chlorinating at all.
Yeah, so if I understand this correctly, do we actually have to invest significantly in some infrastructure for those bores to become compliant in terms of Taumata Arawai?
Correct. Yes.
Do we understand the magnitude of that?
We've got a design report done, and we understand the magnitude of that, and that'll be coming in the next LTP.
And I suppose, I guess the cheeky question...
Is the question? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I suppose the cheeky question here is, would tranche 2 of the Better Off funding be put to good use for that project? If we had it available?
I'm not sure that we could use tranche 2 for water infrastructure projects.
Thank you. Point made. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've just got a question about community library renewals. So on page 90, we've got quite a small sum in the budget for community library renewals under programme 1120. And given the structural issues that have been uncovered at Awapuni Library, I'm wondering if that sum is going to be sufficient to affect the repairs at Awapuni Library.
I'd have to come back with more detail around that from the work that's currently underway.
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear. Is your microphone on?
My apologies. I'd have to come back to you with some more detail around that. Bryce is unavailable this morning, and we would need to just confirm that with his team.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Did you want?
Councillor Barrett.
Sorry.
Was there an officer? Kathy, did you want to comment on, as a response?
We will do whatever we need to do to fix the issues at Awapuni Library.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Scott and team, for the report. I think 3 questions I'd like to get answers to. The first one arises on page 84, which is outlining at the top of that page the active and public transport space. And quite a, I guess just a trend across there is there's a lot of behind schedule. Notably, 2207, we've spent 1% of the budget. Can you give us a sense of kind of what the community is missing out on when we're not spending these budgets?
Hamish Freeman, GM Transport and Development. Through Mr. Chair, so that particular one that you mentioned is in the same vein as the Transport Choices funding that we're doing. So this year we're focusing on getting those projects over the line, so we're not missing out on anything on top of that at this stage.
Thank you. My second question is trying to compare, I suppose, the assessment on page 57 with page 74, which the examples there are in the performance against various different performance measures. In the example on page 74, we have assigned ourselves a yellow around measure 7, it looks like, because we're taking 18 hours instead of 10 hours to get there. I guess the point that I'm trying to get at is to note that that's earned ourselves a yellow. When we go to page 57, in the transport space, we're off target and we assign ourselves a red. So the question, as I can hear from across the chamber from my colleagues coaching me, the question that I have is kind of whether we take a uniform approach to the handing out of red or yellow, or if that's kind of left to each specific area to make a call on what qualifies.
In the first instance, each area or manager gives the grading of colour, and then they're reviewed by us and ELT.
And the purpose of that review by yourselves and ELT is?
To make sure that there's a consistency there. Yeah.
And so I assume the review is done and your view is that this is consistent?
Looking at the median response time of 18 hours and the target's less than 10, I'm not sure that it would get back on track by the end of year, just sort of mathematically, which means that one we might have missed, should have been a red perhaps.
Thank you for those answers. Finally, just wanted to understand on page 57, measure 4, which is footpaths meeting council standards, has gone green, yellow, red over 3/4. Is that about the rate of decline of the actual state of the assets, or is that about changes in our awareness? What's driving that rapid change?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So throughout the year, we have done the inspection on the footpaths themselves and got a new condition rating. We've also done a number of repairs to the footpaths, which impact the level of the condition as well. Unfortunately, it has just been a negative downward trend, and tree roots is one of the key things we're struggling to deal with at this stage.
So I realize this is kind of a reporting back, but any comment on where we're likely to be going in this space, and are we expecting to be in the red zone for a short time, a long time, indeterminate time?
We do have a reasonable size amount of programmed work coming up between now and the end of the financial year on footpaths, so we're hoping to see it move back into the yellow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. My question's on page 47 to do with the stormwater. Could you just give me an update on where the stormwater project is up to and when is it all likely to be fixed going forward so that we have a good update on that and feel confident with the stormwater going into the autumn season? Not sure who's answering the question.
Mike Monaghan, Group Manager, Three Waters. I think my response to the question is that we have an annual work schedule for stormwater for both renewals and capital new, and we're on target this year to complete the annual workload. I don't quite understand maybe the question about when it will all be fixed.
I'm just reading what's in the report.
Yep, I think, and my answer is that we're on target to complete this year's work programme for stormwater.
So it hasn't been interrupted and the design's not on track?
So early in the year, when the weather conditions didn't allow us to do the physical construction work, we are catching up on that, and we will complete the year's programme.
Okay.
Okay, can I ask another question, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely. The floor's yours.
Thank you. Page 51 to the budget variation requests. So these requests are for two separate areas.
No, the request is to transfer from one area to the other, but it's outside the Chief Executive's delegation of 30% of the activity budget, so it requires council approval.
51 of the report.
Okay,
It's transferring from one renewal program to another.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, thanks to the officers for report. I've got a few questions. So that digital, the ERP and the digital project, because it's really time constrained, isn't it, around it's got to be completed by the end of financial year? Is that right? So we'll do that?
Correct. We're still aiming to go live on 1 July. We've just had some timing delays with when payments were expected versus are being actually made, which is creating the variance.
Okay. Number two, I mean, the report's really good on expenses and you know, what's controlled and where things are. It's pretty light on the revenue side. Our external, obviously, rates is there, and that's fairly self-explanatory. But what about our other external revenue? The Mercury money, when is that in there, or is that coming? Also, just our NZTA FAR rate revenue, is that on track, or are we behind, or can anybody give answers to those?
There is a breakdown of some revenue categories in Appendix 7 on page 94 of your papers. That goes into a further level around operating subsidies and grants and capital subsidies and grants. A lot of the Waka Kotahi revenue sits in that space. Other revenue contains the Mercury revenue that we're expecting. Okay. It's pretty hard for a councillor or indeed the members of public to actually, I mean, it's grouped, in my opinion, a bit tight. Is it worthy of, certainly to the elected members? Whoa. Have we paid our electricity bill?
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, we obviously have. So Scott, I just wonder if it's worthy of just maybe that could be teased out a little bit more to councillors. I'd certainly be interested to know a little bit more in that.
That's the table on page 37 in the operating performance summary. Is that the one you're referring to?
No, Appendix 7, which does give a little bit more of a breakdown of operating revenue, capital revenue, but it really has only got 8 or 7 income lines, and some of them are big numbers, and it's just other revenue. Well, what is that 29 million made up of? Is it NZTA? Is it other government departments? Is it Mercury money? Just to be nice to know what that is, and a breakdown, and even if that's a footnote or something. And if we're on budget with, because be nice to know if we're on budget on some of that stuff.
Absolutely, we can get that detail.
Thank you. And probably this is to you, Cam. The further to questions that Councillor Hancock was talking about, would it not be our decision as councillors and governors around that tranche money rather than officers?
Absolutely, it will be. So tranche 1 is still as was decided through this chamber. But what we can do is bring back to you for your consideration, just to remind you what programs we're going to feed into tranche 2, and you can decide whether you still want to proceed with that or group it into, say, something else that you've already got in the other list of programs. So it's not saying we're going to decide that. That's saying that you would decide, but we can bring that back for your decision making.
My recognition, remembrance of that discussion was we hadn't really talked about tranche 2 that much, so I would hope that officers have a pretty open mind on it as well. Thank you. My final question, Chair, is probably to Project Management Office, and I acknowledge officers and contractors have really improved in terms of the capital delivery, but ballpark, what are we going to be facing in terms of carry forwards?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We're working hard to not make significant changes to the carry forwards from those that were indicated at the beginning of the year by offsetting in for other programs in the Capital Works programme for next year. Sorry. Would you like me to repeat that?
Yeah.
Yeah, my apologies. We're working hard to not significantly increase the level of carry forward from that earlier indicated in the February paper by looking at how we offset any carry forward where we have programmes of work already contractually underway with other programmes that have been put forward for next year's programme of work, and we'll be bringing that to you on that 31st of May paper. We do understand the constraints.
Yeah, I suppose, well, okay, I'm waiting into comments, I'll leave that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, that leads well into the questions I have, which are also around the capital programme. On page 36, it suggests the predicted year-end position would be somewhere between 65 and 70 million of a $113.8 million programme. So we're still sort of, I don't know, around...
Sorry, just for clarity, we're referring to page numbers in the report, but in the order paper it's page 86, I believe. Is that right, Councillor? Just, I can see people looking for the page to follow
apologies,
your...
I might be looking at a previous copy of this agenda.
I think there's a page numbers
2.
on the report, but then there's the order paper pages.
Okay, so in the Chief Executive Summary, it talks about the forecast year end as being 65 to 70, so which still leaves around a $45 million gap from our full programme. And 20 million was identified in our February deliberation, so we're still about 25 million gap, as I understand it. And based on your answer to the Mayor's question, are you suggesting that we wouldn't carry forward all of that?
Yes, I am.
And so are you suggesting that there's some reductions in the programme value of quite a few programmes?
There's actually a combination of factors that are going on. We have a number of programmes where there are savings this year as a result of either work that can't occur for the year and is being deferred to the LTP. An example of that would be the Kikawhenua land purchase. And we have other things such as rolling renewal programmes where we were working to use those as much money as possible in those this year, but we wouldn't be asking to carry forward anything that's not spent. We would just take the programme forward into the following year from a deliverability aspect. And then there are a number of contracts in place where, because of wet weather or cyclone and the high wind levels at one point, construction was delayed. So we will need to carry forward on those, and we're looking at how that could be offset against other work that's going on for next year. And that will come to you for discussion as part of the deliberations option.
Thank you. And just further to that, under the capital delivery status, the report, page 5, on those pie graphs, that bottom one for the third quarter is showing that most of the programs are either in progress or complete. There's only 3% that aren't started.
Yes.
With an overall estimated delivery of somewhere between 57 and 60%, is there any thinking in the Project Management Office of not starting some programs, rather than having a whole lot of programs halfway through, reducing the number of programs that you start so that there's more that are actually complete?
Yes, we have, as an infrastructure leadership team, we've been talking about that and how we manage that as we're at this end of the year. And the reporting here is not, it doesn't split finely between something like design and construction. So in some cases, it may be that that the work has started, design is complete, but the construction will be deferred out into an LTP in some cases, or that the construction was always intended to be the following year, and we're just getting that last bit of design in. So absolutely, those are some of the things we are considering and have actually talked about widely as a group, not starting if it can't be completed.
So would that thinking follow through to next year's budget rather than being applied to this year's budget? Okay. And just one more follow-up question on that. So, because I recall at last year's annual budget discussions, there was a consideration of the amount of programs that were being designed for, and there was a question mark about how many of those would be delivered on. Will that information be provided in the May report? Will we have an understanding of the amount of the budget that is going into the design work for programs?
Yes, we can provide that.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one further question. Wanted to check in around the earthquake-prone heritage buildings. There's a note on Measure 4 and page 62 indicating that we haven't had much uptake and that we're expecting that as the deadlines approach, we might see a peak in uptake. Just wondered from a, I guess, finance point of view, is there any thinking within the organization about restructuring that fund in a way that recognizes there may be a peak coming, or is the current thinking to keep it a static level?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there hasn't been any thought given to date about restructuring that fund. Since this report was prepared, we have had a couple of additional inquiries, which we're working through the funding process, which is positive. So, yeah, we're continuing to engage with landowners or about the availability of the fund or reference the fund when we're talking to those owners when they come in and talk about consents and things like that. But that certainly might be something that could be considered as part of the LTP as to whether there's a more sort of agile way for that fund to be packaged together and delivered.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No further speakers. Thank you very much for your report and answering the questions here today. To progress us into the debate and comment, I'll move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Councillor Hancock, I understand you have an additional recommendation to add.
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Yes, so the motion is that the Chief Executive provide a report on bacteria compliance in the city's water supplies, including detail of how compliance is going to be remedied. Not much comment really to be made here, but it seems fairly obvious that even though there is actually some work being undertaken presently to reach that compliance, it will require a significant investment to remedy that. The paper actually advises that we're not going to be able to complete this in this financial year. I just think that since 40% of the city's water supplies is actually provided by bores, our bore supplies, that it's very important that we have some understanding of the magnitude of this particular issue and how we're actually going to manage the risk going forward. So I would just ask that everybody support that, please.
And that's seconded by Councillor Barrett. Can I, as Chair, just ask for the CE or to refer to your team a response on the actions that will be taken and whether or not this will be included in the long-term planning elements or the annual budget debates, or is this just for your view on the timeline that you'll be able to present this for us?
Is the microphone off? Through you, Chair. We can certainly turn this, bring a report back on this recommendation. But as far as the physical work goes, that's ongoing, and we have a programme next year to continue that work. But it will need some substantial infrastructure in the next LTP to get us to that point. We are in close communication with Taumata ROI, and we're preparing what's called an exemption report, to hopefully be able to work with them to get us to a compliance point whilst we're doing this, while we're working on getting the infrastructure in place. But we can certainly bring this report back.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Further speakers, we're going to speak on all recommendations if you wanted to. So we're going to carry on with the order. Councillor Naylor. including the recommendation in Councillor Hancock's name.
Thank you. I'm comfortable with that second recommendation. Just speaking to the broader report, as always, very good comprehensive report. Thanks to officers for that. Just in line with some of my questions around the capital program, I look forward to the report that comes to us later in the month with our deliberations for the annual budget. The size of the capital program does continue to bother us in a number of ways, and the delivery of that, targeting towards perhaps 57 to 60% delivery is no bad reflection on staff. I think what it does reflect is it was a unrealistic sized program to begin with, and many of you will recall the discussion last year at last year's annual budget, and it was certainly some effort to try and reduce that didn't kind of get across the line. I think it's I'm really pleased to hear officers' comments about their thinking going forward about how to perhaps minimise, we've talked about this bubble that gets pushed from year to year with a large amount of carry forwards, and I'm pleased to hear that there is some thinking going into how that can be managed in a better way rather than just carrying forward really big sums into the following year, because as everyone is aware, we've already got a very big proposed capital program for next year. So I think, I'll leave it there. My only other concern really is around that is when we're starting a whole lot of programs, but we don't have the capacity to complete those programs. I think that's a concern, and I'm pleased to hear that officers are putting some thinking into that as well. But when we've got 97% of our programs having been started, but we're looking at perhaps completing only 57 to 60%, then I think that highlights a concern that I think we need to see addressed in quite a proactive way, so that it minimises the potential for us to put a whole lot of planning into programs that don't get delivered in the next year or two. And then there's the risk that information, that work actually becomes outdated or potentially not even used in some instances. So I think it's important that we get that a bit more aligned. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment, I guess, on the performance aspect of the performance and financial report, and in particular the performance measures side of things, which I think we're getting some really good information in this report, and particularly just to focus on the Goal 3, Connected and Safe Community. There's so much rich information in there about the excellent programs that have been delivered by the communities team across libraries and community development. And I think it makes some really heartening reading, to be honest. In terms of the numbers of people that are benefiting from the programs, in terms of the variety and the just the richness of programs that have been offered, and I think it's very heartening. And I'm pleased to note that there's been a lot of upgrades done on the community centres, and that they are going well. I just think it's very good reading, and I just want to note congratulations to that Department of Council, I suppose, because they're doing a good job, and they don't have an opportunity to report to us directly on all of the work that they're doing, but other than this report. And so I think it's very important that we do acknowledge the excellent work that's been done there, and the the community wellbeing has been enhanced by those teams, and they need to be congratulated. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too just want to acknowledge the staff and contractors as well that have been working pretty hard in this last quarter, or reported quarter. There's two things I want to just mention, and I support the second recommendation that's there. Just on that, I would have to say though, we do have some of the best reticulated water in the country. So I'd hate to think, if we've got some issues, I'd hate to think what the rest of the country's got. So I just want to put that into context, and do understand that the compliance levels have gone through the roof in terms of reporting. So I'm sure we'll get back a decent understanding of what we need to do. but just wanted to put that in context as well. Two things that I want to focus on or comment on are ensuring we're getting our fair share of external revenue. And just my questions to the officers were just an understanding of where those things are coming from. And it minimises our reliance on rates. And I say that because for the size of our city, we're heavily rate reliant, and it does pose some issues around the heavy lifting going forward. So are we getting our fair share from others? And there's multiple others. And I look at other cities like Rotorua and New Plymouth, who are much smaller in size, but they don't have the rates reliance that we have. So we should be starting to look towards making sure that we get that external revenue in. The Works program, like Councillor Naylor, I agree. Look, you've done well. You've certainly moving the dial, but we started from a pretty low base. So the catch-up, I favour a catch-up in 24-25, and I just stress to the officers, if instead of push and go, or if you think you can look at not starting something that's obviously undeliverable, then please be honest with us and do that. I don't want to see another 50 or even 60 million going forward as carry forwards, and it's not healthy for us continuing to do that. So I think we need to be really honest and have a catch-up year, if that's what it is. Next year could be a good one to do it, and that's what I'd be favouring. So just, again, well done. It's a bit of a long haul, but there has been progress made, and just want to acknowledge the officers' work. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for my comments, I want to make acknowledgement of the resourcing page where we've seen our staffing status, and I think that's a really good add to this report to actually understand our capacity and our situation for our workforce around recruitment and retention, and I think that's been a helpful add. I would also make mention of the Katoia ozone replacement project, quite a significant project. This will be one of the last times this will get reported through before the end of June, when we're going to go live 1st of July, and I just would, to see that it's got back on track to go live, and the confirmation that the officers still have intentions for that, and realise that is quite a significant internal project for us, and just want to highlight the importance of that. And going forward, we're going to have our budget deliberations, no doubt, and that'll include the carry forwards from this year's work. And I would concur with some of the comments around wanting to make sure that the work plan and future budgets is a bit of a catch-up and is achievable, and not have the sights set too high in this environment. Councillor Hancock, you've spoken, but you want to speak again as a response, as a right of reply on your recommendation?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just commenting just briefly. I did ask some questions earlier on, just really around the second tranche of Three Waters funding. And I guess really just to clarify that is that my curiosity around that is really the fact that, you know, through some political pressure and the government actually changing the model in which, you know, the affordable waters is going to be delivered, has caused council to lose $24 million in terms of potential revenue. So there is that, which is, I think, concerning. And I don't make that as a political comment. I really just say that this is an unfortunate situation for council. And also, I guess, when we see, you know, some things like, you know, non-compliance around our city's bore supplies, that really just sort of underpins and underlines the fact that, you know, we have still got some work to do in that space. Yeah, really it's concerning because it will put more pressure on both our annual budget and long-term planning going forward, and there will be some things which we won't be able to do because we have in fact actually lost that money, and we've actually got some more investment to do in our waters. So those are my concluding comments. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So I propose to take all the recommendations together. This will become the new recommendation 2. And then the recommendations to council that are in the report, which are 2, 3 and 4, will become 3, 4 and 5. I'll take them together unless there's a request otherwise. we're just taking the first two recommendations, which is recommendation in the report and recommendation 2 in the name of Councillor Hancock, seconded by Councillor Barrett, and invite a vote. That's passed 12 votes for, none against. The balance of the recommendations, again, invite a vote. Did we not move them when we? No, we just did the committee recommendations, so this is the ones to council. Okay. I'm going to move the recommendations. There's just slight confusion there, sorry. And Councillor Naylor second. Members, I'm going to open it up for any comments. My intention was that we opened the comments up on all the recommendations. I thought I'd move them all. So if there's confusion for anyone else, but otherwise I will open it up in case there was. Was there any comment on these recommendations? No. I'd now like to invite a vote. Thank you. Sorry. That's passed 12 votes for and none against. That moves us on to the Treasury report, 9-month ending 31st of March. Invite Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager for Finance, to the table to present. Thank you.
Morning, Mr Chair and elected members. The report basically speaks for itself, but I would like to make a comment about a couple of things that have happened since the end of the 9 months. I mentioned in the report that the Council's review of its credit rating, the Standard & Poor's, was underway, and we were expecting advice about that shortly. Well, last week we received confirmation from them that the credit rating had been retained at its present AA level, which is very good for us, so that's a pleasing outcome. Second thing is, in the report we mentioned that in terms of the Council's risk profile for its debt, that there was a minor part about 5 years out where the policy isn't being adhered to at the time, at the 31st of March, and so we were looking for opportunities to enter the market to protect the fixed nature of the portion of the debt by entering some more swaps, and we've purchased a couple of those, two at $20 million that start in 3 or 4 years' time. But pleasingly, those ones were able to be obtained so that the interest rates are protected at both, one of them was at 3.8% and the other 3.9%. We've been targeting trying to make sure that those future interest rates were under 4%, and so those were a couple of good opportunities to enter swap agreements that preserved that for us. As well, during the course of April, there's been a lot of outgoings in terms of cash because the programs are making a bit better progress, and so we've raised a further $10 million of longer-term bonds during that period. Just in summary then, at the end of March, debt levels obviously were lower than the budget assumed, because consistent with where we're at in the capital program. The interest cost was slightly higher than the budget due to the interest rate movements. The market is still volatile. We're managing that through with our advisors. So there aren't any surprises here really from my perspective, and the end of year position in terms of expense will depend on the progress over the next short time with the capital program and just how much more we need to raise to fund that.
Thank you, Steve. There's questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thanks, Steve. Just at the end of the report, you talked about having to reassess the approach to debt in the light of the delay in the Three Waters changes. Have you had a chance to assess how that might affect the planning of the raising of the debt?
one of the things that we've tended to do in terms of the way we've managed the portfolio over the last couple of years is to continue to do so on the assumption, well, not doing anything super special because of the Three Waters movement, and trying to maintain a sensible policy in terms of entering what we think is appropriate interest rates and terms and things, and then taking the view that whenever the debt transferred to the DIA, if that was to happen, that there would be negotiations about that and our position would be covered. And so those preliminary discussions we had with the DIA about how the debt will be handled have certainly reinforced that as being a reasonable approach. And so the extension of, I suppose, the time that we'll be responsible for Three Waters hasn't affected in reality the way what we've been raising in terms of money or the terms that we've been raising it for. All it does now is make us think a little bit harder about, I suppose, the level of capital that we're going to be incurring over the next 3 years and 2.5 years, and just quite what that might translate to in terms of a debt program. We've still got more work to do about that, and I've heard some questions in this chamber about, well, can the council cope within its debt limits, for example, over the next 2 years? And I'm reasonably confident that that's the case because of the delays in the wastewater program that it was mentioned in a recent meeting that there aren't expected to be high levels of expenditure of the levels that were shown in the 10-year plan. So with that in mind, I don't see the delay as being a problem for the debt management.
That's very reassuring, thank you.
And I guess that's been taken into account in the credit rating as well. They've made that same assessment.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Along similar lines, my questions are the page 115, the graphs there of that forecast the debt levels, the top one with the Three Waters and the bottom one excluding Three Waters. The top one, if we look at 2026, I take it that red line is at about 400 million by 2026 with the Three Waters included, is that correct?
That's what that graph's saying, yes.
So
we though, when I think about it, these figures are up for substantial review, is my expectation, as a result of the decisions you're about to take in the budget and in thinking about how things will be programmed for the first year of the 10-year plan. So it's one of the more difficult things we have to do in this debt management space, is just to try to say, well, what's a reasonable program that we can assume in order to manage? And that's been moving around so much in terms of what we think's going to happen, that it's been very hard to put a stake in the ground and say this is it. But in terms of the way I feel about it at the moment, I guess a gut feel that what we're hearing around the organisation and the material that we're bringing together, the expectation that I have is that the debt levels wouldn't be nearly as high as 400 million by the 30th of June 2026, but we've yet to go through the process to formally come to that conclusion.
okay, so my question really was, so that is with less the 30%?
Yes, it was.
So
yes.
if, and that's including all the stuff in the LTP for those years?
It included what was said in the LTP, but it recognises as well that in the LTP we had a provision for the wastewater project that was less than what we're now talking about it as being the cost. So
you're saying the cost is now more than what?
Well, at the time that you accepted the proposal to take forward to the Regional Council, we were talking about a potential cost of that project that was quite a bit higher than what we had in the 10-year plan, but that we don't have any certainty about that number at the minute.
Okay, sorry, just to follow on. So the second graph under that is excluding Three Waters.
Yes.
So what's the purpose of that graph?
Through the period of the last year or two, we've just been trying to get a sense of if the debt that's associated with Three Waters were to transfer outside the council to another party, how would that leave us in terms of the proportion of the debt that we had fixed versus floating?
Okay.
And that's what that's trying to judge, was we were trying to make sure, or have been trying to make sure that that we don't end up with what debt the council has left all being totally fixed, because the policy is saying we want a mix of fixed and floating.
Okay. So at what point will we see a graph, something like one of these, with the current scenario of us having Three Waters till 2026 and then not having Three Waters?
Yeah, the difficulty is that there's been so much. What we've got in reality are programs that were in the 10-year plan. You've made calls about changes to those through this year's annual budget and some other subsequent changes as well. And then you've made some provisional calls about the budget for 23-24 and about to review those at the end of the month. So the slight problem, I think, in terms of getting a sense of these things is the programs that have been deferred through these changes that over the last 18 months or 2 years, there's no certainty about when they will actually be done. So deciding how to profile them in this sort of graph becomes very difficult. And what we've been saying amongst ourselves is, well, how can we best give you a bit of a sense of that, knowing that it's really going to have an E&OE about it and a level of a bit of a guess. But that's what we're looking to try to do shortly. We don't have that information in a form that's capable of doing that for you right now, but we're trying to think of ways of being able to give you a sense of where that stands.
Okay, thank you. Just maybe just one final question. So your response about the 400 million at 2026, am I correct to understand that you're suggesting that some of the wastewater BPO investment that was proposed for 25 and 26 will be at a later date?
That's my understanding, yes, and that's our assumption.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. There's no further questions.
Sorry, Mr.
Chair,
Chair,
Mr. Mayor.
I was.
That's okay, Steve. If you just hold your seat, and Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Couple of things, Steve. Have we received our latest Standard & Poor's rating?
I mentioned just a little earlier that we have, and we got that last week, and it's an update. It's just retaining the same rating as we had before.
Okay, that's impressive, yeah. Two, probably further to Councillor Naylor's questions, and perhaps you're not the right one to answer, but it does have an impact on all these graphs, because we're now 2 years plus for a consent, probably another 2 years for a land purchase, probably another 3 years for the build, and then possibly another year for commission. So do these graphs really at this stage, a bit of crystal ball gazing, aren't they? I mean, they don't really show when that true expenditure is going to fall.
Trouble is they're the best we've got at the moment, and what we have, and so that's partly why we've had to give them what we've called a haircut, and that's what and we're looking for ways to try and get a little bit more certainty about them, but they're the best that we can plan to at the moment.
So will our infrastructure team and waters team feed, and obviously October has a big bearing on things from a central government perspective, but when will they feed in that information to you? Otherwise, the two don't marry together.
Well, what we're trying to do all the time is to get a sense of a feel for what's happening and to make adjustments in terms of the way we think about this, and whether the so-called haircut should be more or less in order to, and if we felt that it needed to change and would have a significant influence on the way in which we manage the debt profile, then we would come to you and talk to you about that. But at the moment, it's not having a really significant influence on the way in which we're managing the debt profile. We're trying to enable...
But Steve, we haven't got a consent and we...
Oh, no, I appreciate that, and that's the reason, I mean, that's the story we gave to the rating agencies, and that's what we're thinking as well in terms of the way in which we're managing the risk here.
Yeah, because any major expense is not going to happen for at least 4 years on this chart.
Absolutely. Well, that's our assumption as well at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one more question. I note many councils, and I've been speaking to a few, just around how they have either a reserve, either some assets or an investment fund. And I note that we did have an investment fund, and there's very good reasons why we didn't persist with that. And you've, in past meetings, you've told us why, was to really it's the net debt that's the big issue. But at times they've used it to offset things. Do you think we should, with Tamakuku and a few other things where we actually are raising some money, that a revisit of that thinking could be done?
We will obviously be looking at all of those sorts of things as part of the financial strategy development for the 10-year plan and looking at options. I think if I could just comment on the fact that we had reserves in the past. When I first came to the council, we had lots of reserves. It was part of the way in which you did things. You had reserves for Africa about every little tolly thing, to replace cars, replace whatever. We had a reserve for it. And then the way in which councils began to fund themselves changed, and there was a lot less of those sort of pockets of money and more about managing an overall picture. We had the situation, we had a very large investment fund, and we were managing that and looking to that as a way in which you'd have some flexibility about revenue and the way in which you shared it. The council of the day, for reasons they chose that wasn't in the best interests of the city and that we should repay it, and so creating a reserve of any substance is something that would take quite a time, and there are options to do that, but to be able to use it in a way that would actually provide a significant difference is quite a challenge to get something that's of scale. And if we looked at Tamakuku, it's some time yet before we actually have any cash surplus from that.
But we will.
Let's hope.
I hope it's more than hope. Thank you.
No further questions, Steve. Thank you. I'll move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Naylor, and open it up for any comment. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, thanks, Steve, for your expert advice, as always. It's really appreciated. A couple of things here. October's going to be a bit of a watershed for us as a council, probably more so, excuse me, than most, because it'll affect these charts quite significantly. But I just want to put out there that we're still some way before pushing or putting a spade in the ground to upgrade our wastewater plant. We're at least 4 years away, possibly even more, but there'll be work concurrently happening, but it won't be the big build work which pushes that debt right up. We'll know where we're heading in October, and whichever way, we'll be able to plan that better. I just want to talk about just for a moment, what other councils are doing around either holding some assets, having a reserve, an investment fund, and the reasons they do that. It happened just recently here, close to us, where, if you can recall, Manawatu District had a small reserve fund. They were facing some quite challenging increases, and they pulled that reserve fund forward just to soften the blow for ratepayers. Our regional colleagues do it all the time with their assets in infrastructure, ports and others. We need to look at doing that again, I believe. I look at smaller councils that do have investment funds. Some have been somewhat, perhaps had different drivers for that than us. We've put our money into facilities and some other things. As a city, we need to do that the wider region. But I do think there is a time when we start to have a look at ourselves and protecting some of our own financial well-being as well. And I would like to think that something like Tamakuku, the surplus out of Tamakuku, which, as Steve said, will take some time, won't be huge, but it may be in the realm of 10 million, that we put that into a reserve fund, that we just lock away there for that rainy day. And believe me, the rainy days will be coming, I'm sure. So happy to support this, and thank Steve and other officers for their efforts. Also worth noting, to have our Standard & Poor's rating back is significant, and we can't underestimate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I might just also make comment on the Mayor's valid point around the timeline still for the wastewater, going through consenting and designating land and then to contract out and find a workforce to build something like this, and can find that quite acceptable that there's still 4 odd years out in process before we even get these bigger figures in our budgets. And so therefore this risk timeline, I think, is something that we do need to feed some realistic information in, so we can have the best information to date. That was the supporting comments on that point. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. You know, there's a lot of things that are moving, obviously, in terms of us looking forward, but this is a really good report, and it's useful to have those charts. I know it's for the purpose of the risk around how we manage the debt, but it also does provide a perspective to us that we sometimes only get during LTP planning. I think something I am really mindful about with the suggestions of investment funds is that any money that comes in, if we put it in an investment fund, that means we can't, it's not offsetting the debt, or it's, you know, it's not paying the debt off. So I'm really happy to be hearing the advice of officers around that going forward, but do have some cautions around the thought of having money aside for a rainy day, especially when we are looking at the forecast debt that we're looking at. I think from my recollection of the debt in our last LTP was around $1.2 billion, and only around 400 or 500 million of that was to do with the wastewater. So there's over 700 million debt that was related to investment that's not Three Waters. So I think we need to be also mindful in our thinking and in our planning that there is a significant amount of debt that doesn't relate to the Three Waters. We can't just all say, oh, if the Three Waters gets pushed out, then our debt will be fine, because it was actually a lot less than half of our last LTP capital investment. So, but that's a little bit of a sidetrack of the purpose of this report, but certainly does bring our thinking does come in, you know, our thinking needs to be focused on our debt going forward for the purposes of this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Just a couple of comments from me. The first one is that when I first came onto council, and in fact quite often since, you know, I've been lobbied by residents that don't understand why we have some of our debt on fixed rate. And, you know, initially, in the low interest rate years, you know, I had some sympathy for that position. But by golly, now we're seeing the other side of it. And this, you know, if those people are watching now, this is why we have the fixed rate proportion of our debt, because this is where our interest rate exposure hasn't gone up to the giddying heights that it might have done because of the proportion that's fixed. So I just want to make that point publicly, because I think it's important. The other point is just around the debt raising for Three Waters, and I did have a little concern that with the deferral of at least a couple of years more that we would be holding on to the water assets, if not longer, that would affect our ability to manage the debt profile. So I was very reassured by Steve's answer that that's all in hand. So I do have a lot of confidence in our staff's ability to manage this debt portfolio. And I just want to thank Steve for his work and everyone else who's involved behind the scenes, because I think it is a very important aspect of how we manage our debt. So thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers, so now I'll invite a vote. It's passed unanimously, 12 votes for, none against. Members, that is a natural break in our run sheet, so we'll now adjourn for morning tea, and we've been requested for 20 minutes, so we'll be back in the chamber at 10 past. Thank you.